Welcome to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the PulpNet, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Online at thepulp.net. In this Pulp Event podcast, Bob Dice and Wyatt Doyle, co-editors of the Men's Adventure Library book series, profile Ava Lynd, Countess, actress, and cover girl. Ava was an artist's model who graced the covers of many men's adventure magazines, which evolved from the pulp magazines. She also acted in TV shows and commercials. Bob runs the website, menspulpmags.com. Wyatt is the head of the New Texture publishing imprint. They worked with Ava Lynd to create the book about her, Ava, men's adventure supermodel. This event was recorded on Saturday, August 21, 2021, at PulpFest 2021 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Wyatt begins.
We'll proceed chronologically somewhat, and although Ava cannot be here, she can be with us in a virtual sense, and we'll let her introduce herself and give a little of her background.
I was born in Sweden, in the second biggest city, I guess, Göteborg, Gothenburg, and my mother was already in America in 1948, so I lived with my grandmother a great deal, and I was shipped off to the United States in 1950, and my mother was waiting for me in New York City, and talking about being a little bit unbelievable when it comes to trading places. I lived in a small town with my grandmother, which was outside of Gothenburg, and coming from that town to New York City was earth-shaking in a lot of ways, because I could hardly believe the tall buildings and taxi cabs and all the noise, all the people, all the lights. It was a total transformation. It was sort of amazing all the way around. And then I lived there for a little bit and ended up in Ohio. But not first of all, I went to high school of music and art in New York. And then I ended up in Ohio in my final 2 years in Ashtabula, in a small town in Ashtabula, which I still love very much. I think of that as my hometown in the United States, because that's the longest I ever stayed anywhere. I moved around a lot, which is a whole different story.
Anybody here from Ashtabula or nearby? All right. Outstanding.
I'm from Dayton.
I didn't know you were from Dayton. See, all these Ava neighbors. So something Ava left out of her introduction to herself is the fact that, as Mike said, she's Swedish royalty. And I'm going to read her comments from the book about that. She says, "The fact that my father was a count makes me a countess. But I never thought much about that, since my idea of being a countess was that I should be rich and live in a castle. Since none of that was true, I never used my title or thought it was important. Some friends used to call me Countess as a nickname, and my brother, who still lives in Sweden, uses his title, Count Asti von Felix. My paternal grandfather was born in Riga, Latvia. Legend has it that he lived in a castle until the family moved to Norway. So, although Ava is royalty, it's not something she really trades in very much, although having a nickname Countess in the 50s is kind of hip.
Well, and it was used in some of the pinup photo spreads that she modeled for. They would call her the Countess. Yeah.
It's a great hook. Ava, obviously, as she said, she moved around a lot. Her mother had moved to the States ahead of her, and she was primarily raised by her grandparents and a fairly idyllic kind of childhood, and mostly in the country. And so when she came to New York, as she said, it was just an overwhelming experience for her. And I have to wonder, there's no way she could have predicted what New York would hold for her in the future. Before I change the slide, I have to ask, am I the only one who sees a little bit of Kirsten Dunst in that one photo? All right.
Well, when I lived in Ashtabula in the summertime, there was a nearby summer stock company that hired me for both summers, my junior and senior year summer. And I learned everything about acting from the ground up. I painted scenery, I did help with costumes, and I even did a few small parts, which was very nice. It thrilled me a lot. I learned a lot. I loved it. And I knew, of course, at that point that I was going to be an actress and possibly a model, but mostly an actress, because that's what I really loved.
So here we see Ava on stage as a bit of a beatnik there. And does anybody recognize her later very famous compatriot there on the far left of the screen?
Looks like Elvis a little bit.
That would be amazing if that was Elvis. That is for sure. The king and the countess. I'll give you a hint. We just lost him. He just passed away very recently. Good guess. Very close, but kind of physical resemblance there. I'll throw out a few movies. The Heartbreak Kid.
Charles Grodin.
Bingo. That is Charles Grodin. So that was before he was Charles Grodin, and apparently he wrote about his years in this theater company in his autobiography, but Ava said he was not very kind about the theater company, so at some point I'll have to track that down and see it. Ava she was pretty much had very happy times in the theater company and working in summer stock. But as she said, she moved around quite a bit, and eventually she was back in New York. And this will give you a sense of how her earliest beginnings as a model and as a pinup, really.
My earliest modeling experience had to do with just modeling, I guess, for pinup people. I had some beauty contests going that I won, and I think somebody saw me in that and decided I should be doing some pinups. So that's how that started, and it was sort of fun. I enjoyed doing it. I was pleased that somebody thought I was pretty enough to want to photograph me and use me in magazines. That was sort of startling in a way. I was 17 at the time, and I didn't really know that I was that pretty. But evidently somebody thought so. So that helped because it made more money than I made at, for example, working for Schratz, which I did for a little while before I got started. And it went from there. Actually, I did some television, early television, things like with Steve Allen and those early people, which was also fun. Mostly because I had been a beauty queen, I guess, so I did some of those on those shows. And that was really fun, too. I enjoyed that. My earliest experience, I guess, was working with Carol Burnett in a little skit. And I realized then how absolutely marvelous she was, and I had a lot to learn, which hopefully I did later on.
So basically, Ava's entree into modeling and acting, and particularly more glamorous type of roles, was via these beauty contests. And some of them, like Miss Steele Pier, that was a big one. That was Atlantic City, I believe. Miss Value for Money, which is amazing. She didn't remember too much about that one. But the Miss Dairy Queen up top is... That's actually from a Steve Allen Show skit. So she had been discovered as a beauty queen in these various contests, and they brought her on, and she was kind of a cameo. She made a lot of cameo appearances as when they needed a beautiful woman for a skit or a sketch or just to come out and hand Steve Allen something. She did quite a bit of that. She referred to working with Carol Burnett, which was also in the show, and as she described it, of course, it hasn't survived, the footage, but she said it was basically her and Carol Burnett came walking out across on opposite ends of the stage. They were both wearing the same outfit. And as they passed each other, they both gave each other a little sniff and moved on. I would love to see that. She would love to have it. But so from there, obviously, these photos circulated. They went out on wire services. And that was another great level of notoriety for her that then led to her work as a pinup.
Pinup modeling has to do with just looking pretty and being a bit sexy. So looking into camera with the idea of, I love you, making love to the camera, and just moving around a little bit so they see part of you, and they can take picture after picture after picture. But that's basically it. They're showing emotion and being, I guess, sexy. That's about it.
This is a fraction, a true tip of the iceberg in terms of how many pinup spreads ended up being published featuring Ava. She sometimes had an understanding of how she'd be presented, and other times not at all. And there would be some very ridiculous statements attributed to her in these pinups that could have only come from the mind of a magazine editor trying to stimulate their readership. And could you speak to that, Bob? The pinup world in magazines at that time?
Yeah, in fact, that I'd say was probably seen more by more men in her pinup photos than anything, because she was on the cover or in interior photo spreads of dozens of men's bachelor magazines and pinup magazines and photo magazines. And you folks who know vintage mags know there were several different genres back then. There were little digest photo magazines and other kinds of bachelor magazines before Playboy sort of changed the playing field. And Ava, even though Ava continued to model into the 60s, long after Playboy started, she was really a glamour girl pinup model. She wasn't, doing the kind that you would see in Playboy, although she did appear in Playboy in a couple of different ads. One for tobacco, as I recall, and one for shoe polish she modeled for. But she was really very, very popular amongst most of the top photographers who did pinup photography used Ava, who were in New York, because that's where she was. That's where they were. That was the center of the universe for a lot of different magazines. And one of them, Peter Bash, if you Google or search for Ava Lynd on eBay, you'll often find lately photos that Peter Bash took of her. And he wrote a lot of books on how to do photography, pinup photography, all kinds of photography. And now somebody's selling his estate, and those show up and sell for hundreds of dollars on eBay. It's amazing to me. I've won a couple of them, but most of the time I get outbid.
There was one magazine that Bob introduced me to actually it was a pair of magazines that I thought were just such a strange concept. There was Hi and Ho. And the idea of those magazines was, instead of, this was clearly it was a gimmick and clearly a cost-cutting measure, whereas your normal magazine would be like this. These were like this. So they were almost more like a roadmap type magazine. Do you have them?
I have one of those magazines. I think you want this USA 51. You want big pound markers, so I like the vintage one you want.
They didn't last long, though, right? The Hi and Ho were both
very
I think
short-lived.
They were
short-lived.
Yeah, they didn't hurt. Like the A-track is the same shape.
Now, another form of modeling that Ava did early on and did quite a bit of was she appeared frequently in true crime and romance magazines. And I wanted to ask her about those specifically because, as she explained, the pinup modeling is basically about looking gorgeous, looking sexy. Whereas with the true crime and the romance magazines, there was a little more to it. And I wondered, since her first love was acting, we asked her what she thought in terms of how did modeling for those types of periodicals, how did that compare to acting?
the crime and romance magazine pictures are slightly different, because, especially the crime magazines, because you have to act. You can't just sit there and pose. Sometimes you have to be running away from somebody, or struggling with somebody who's trying to kill you, and this sort of thing. So you had to be in that sort of mind, acting-wise, like, this guy is going to kill me, so I better take care of myself. So there's where the acting comes in. As far as the romance magazines, pretty much the same as the pin-up ones, because you're working with somebody. I have a couple of covers from romance magazines where I'm just lying down on the ground and a guy is kissing me on the cheek, and I look like this is the best thing that ever happened to me. So again, the acting goes in there. Usually that would be with somebody you just met, somebody who say, "Hi, this is Tom. You are now in love. He's making love to you on the ground. So what you're looking for is how much you love this lovemaking."
And here are some samples of her romance covers. And as you can see, they're mostly as she describes, with her just in ecstasy while some fellow kisses her cheek. These are a particularly interesting angle of her career, or aspect of her career, because she was constantly appearing in both these types of magazines, and yet she did not, Ava was not somebody who went out and, first off, she didn't know when or where a lot of her photos would appear. That goes for pinups, and that goes for these magazines as well. So as a result, and we'll get into how she finally saw them later, but there's still, we've tracked down quite a bit with Ava's help, but there are still tons of Ava appearances in true crime and romance magazines, which she's looked for decades. She says she's had a heck of a time trying to find anybody who deals in the romance magazines of this era. So we really don't know just how many appearances Ava made in the true crime magazines or in these romance magazines. We have a little bit of a better handle on her appearances in Bachelor magazines, and of course some of those pinup photos would then appear in men's adventure magazines, which we'll be getting into. But yeah, that's part of the fun of being an Ava fan, is trying to find all these pieces that even Ava doesn't know are out there. And because there's not the true crime, there is a certain collectability to those, but the romance magazines are a much narrower niche, so it's just not the kind of thing that pops up very often. So if you're going through some old romance magazines, keep an eye peeled for Ava, because she's almost certainly going to be in there from that era. We talked a little bit about some of the advertising work that Ava did, and I asked for her thoughts on that and what that kind of modeling was like.
So usually you are presenting a product. So you're either holding the product or looking at it or pointing at it, and it's the best thing that ever happened. Like, this you must have because it works so well, or it smells so good, or everything is wonderful. And mostly it's about the product and not about you.
Ava obviously did many ads. As you can see, there's the shoe polish ad that Bob had mentioned, where she's sort of a Robin Hood.
Her appearance is in Playboy.
Yeah, and next to that is the Kentucky Club advertisement. That was also in Playboy. That's how Ava was in Playboy without being nude in Playboy. Up at the top there, you see her with some bowling pins. That was another part of the kind of modeling that she would do, is where she would be a spokesmodel for a product, or she would attend a movie premiere, just simply being glamorous, just as a figure of glamour for hire, in a sense.
The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, from your old stomping grounds.
For sure.
They used her as on one of their postcards.
They had a novelty postcard.
Because I have very different favorite American favorite. She's about 50,000 times. How many times did she go to
I mean, you're saying how many times has she been photographed for the bank? Oh, it's just impossible to know. I mean, especially because of the way that a lot of the photos would be recycled and reused, and they'd show up years and years later. And it's not, no one was under any obligation to let the models know once they were paid for the session, no one was under any obligation to let them know when or where the photos might appear. And so pictures of Ava from the 50s would be running in magazines in the 70s. It's been a while since I looked for any of the romance magazines on it. When we were putting the book together, we were digging pretty hard.
Yeah, and I was looking for specific ones that she knew about. So there's probably lots that we don't know about.
You can see here another one of her album covers too, as well. That was another aspect of her modeling career. On some of the album covers, she's very recognizably Ava, and on others, they're a little bit more abstracted. She's in heavy shadow. So the other interesting thing about Ava's advertising work and the way that her images keep coming back is we don't really know exactly what year this was, but it would have been in the early 2000s, I guess. A company called Ann Taintor. Are you familiar with that brand? One of their angles that they used was they would take a lot of vintage glamour photos and repurpose them with some kind of sarcastic comment.
Snarky comment like on dinner napkins and stuff.
Exactly.
The sighting on it.
Yeah, hers was, I hate camping.
Or no, it wasn't I hate camping. It was like, I really love not camping.
I really love not camping. That's it.
And what they did was they just pulled her Head and Shoulders from the Kentucky Club ad and basically dropped a hotel background behind her to make it seem like she's much. Well, nobody ever checked with Ava about it, of course, but she was tickled that she'd been featured, and we reached out to Ann Taintor Company and said, "Hey, we found one of your models. You know, Ava Lynd is one of your models." And I have to believe that because they weren't authorized uses, they were reluctant to get back to us.
That company made a lot of money off that stuff.
They were everywhere, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they had stuff everywhere.
The Ava image, we found it on it was like a makeup clutch on a change tray.
Keychains, all kinds
on
of
a
things.
keychain. Yeah, so hers was one of the more popular images, but I don't know if I'd be interested to see if people are listed, like when people sell them on eBay, if they're referring
They're
to
hard
Ava
to
at
find.
this point.
I've looked lately.
Really?
For
Okay.
more on socks.
I got the socks. I found the socks. This is classic. I'm going through a remaindered book catalog, and they had a couple other stray items, and all of a sudden I see these socks, and I was like, "This is the Ava." So I bought all of them that we could get. Gave a bunch of them to Ava. I think we had them at PulpFest, the last PulpFest too. I think I had them on the table, but yeah, they're a little narrow for my stems.
Look up a whiskey flask and see if you can find the whiskey flask.
She was on the whiskey flask?
I don't know if she's on it, but you look up whiskey flask for Ann Taintor and see if there's some.
That is definitely one of their products, the whiskey flask. I know that.
Because they did a lot of jokes about drinking.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Now, we're talking about her advertising work, and perhaps her most famous contribution to the advertising world, Mike had mentioned earlier.
I'd buy that. Actually, I was around then too. But
So what you're seeing here is not the original edit of the commercial as it aired at the time, but the ad had such appeal in its time that it was later reused. So as you saw at the end, it came in the more contemporary Brill cream packaging, the color. I can't really think of any other product that really went back to the 60s to relaunch their campaign. So it's just a testament to the power of that image. And of course, there were many at the time. It was Bill Keane, the cartoonist who created the Family Circus. He actually did a comic strip, a one-panel comic strip, a gag panel that featured Ava, and when she saw that, she just was over the moon. She said that of all the attention and acclaim she got for the Brill cream ad, she called that her little treasure. Now, another aspect of modeling for Ava that also there's still a lot of mystery out there is her work as a paperback, as a model for paperback covers. These are some of the covers. Ava did have a collection of her paperbacks for a long time. However, her garage flooded, I think it was sometime in the 80s, and destroyed almost all of them. And unfortunately, she didn't chronicle or didn't make a note of what they were. So when we started looking for Ava paperback covers, there was quite a bit of detective work involved. We still, again, like the crime and romance magazines, we're not really sure just how many Ava covers are out there. So we're always looking, and today there was Discovery Today where we thought we had found one. But Bob was less convinced that one was Ava.
Well, that particular one. But
it was a Beacon, I think?
That was a McGuire cover, Robert McGuire, and I don't think he used Ava. But most of the paperbacks she did were for Al Rossi, an artist who did both paperbacks and Men's Adventure magazine art and some other kinds.
These are her thoughts on what it was like. Again, it was a question of what was the mindset for when you're modeling for a paperback cover, and how did that differ from other kinds of models?
As far as covers for books, book covers, it's a matter of just following whatever the story is or whatever they're trying to say in the book. Usually it's you and a guy doing something. If it's a love story, that's the picture that they sell it with. You standing, looking beautiful with him holding you in his arms or whatever. So that again is a bit of acting. It's part of the story rather than just a picture.
And as you can see, we were fortunate enough to have in Ava's collection some of the reference photography from the artist Al Rossi, as you see there. It's not always a situation where we find a shot that lines up perfectly with the artwork, but as you can see, it's pretty clear that these are from those sessions. These are some samples of Ava's work for the artist Al Rossi. These were pieces that were done for Men's Adventure magazines, or as we call them, MAMs. And Bob, can you speak to just a general introduction to the Men's Adventure magazines of that era?
Yeah, just briefly, after World War II, as many of you know who are pulp mag fans, some of the major pulp magazines like Adventure, Argosy, Saga, they started to morph into Men's Adventure magazines. The character was a little bit different than the old pulp magazines. They weren't all fiction. They started to introduce nonfiction stories. They called a lot of them true, and it stretched the meaning of true. They started using true crime stories and things like that. And the Men's Adventure magazine genre is an outgrowth, in my opinion, of pulp mags, kept the tradition of painted covers, added new elements, and for artists it was a great thing because many of the artists and some of the writers who worked for pulp mags went on to work for Men's Adventure magazines in the 50s and 60s. So they played for a number of the artists I've talked to and know about, they played a big role, especially in the realm of art. But some of the writers also kept going, and the Men's Adventure magazines often would reprint old pulp magazine stories too, H. Rider Haggard and so forth, because I think probably because they didn't have to pay for them at that point.
Ava's, the illustrators Ava worked with two illustrators primarily in the work that she did for Men's Adventure magazines. There were a few others. She did work with James Bama, of course, who should be no stranger to anyone in this room. But primarily Al Rossi for interiors, and we'll come to the other artists in a moment. But these are Ava's initial thoughts on working on Al Rossi.
Al Rossi was one of my favorite illustrators. He was so good. When I think about him, at the time, he was so giving and so kind. And he took tons of pictures of me, and I think he's about the only one that actually gave me some of these illustration pictures, which became very important later on, because when we started doing the book, the illustration plus the actual photo which it came from. And it's amazing how good, how good that was.
Here's probably my favorite Ava-Al Rossi collaboration.
And that's actually Al in the tub.
Yeah. Al model, or as I think of him, Bathtub Al Rossi. And his son actually was kind enough to supply us with the original artwork for that. But Ava's very, very fond of Al Rossi. And as she was very fond of this next illustrator, Mr. Norm Eastman. And these are her thoughts on Norm Eastman.
Norm Eastman. I absolutely adored the way he painted me. He did such a good job. And I'm so lucky to have some of these things now because I looked so good then. And it's always nice, when you get older to realize, hey, I was pretty good looking in those days. And yes, he caught me exactly. I mean, you can always tell this is me.
Now, as you can see, the style of action in the work that you did with Norm Eastman is somewhat different from the more, I guess, slightly more subdued work you did with Al Rossi. And
well, yeah, and what's funny to me is when people think of the men's adventure magazine genre, these are the magazines that most people are familiar with, and probably where the term sweat magazines came from, the nickname. These are the most infamous ones, with Nazis doing bad things to both women and American POWs, and then later, bikers were doing bad things and so forth. And they're kind of notorious, but Ava did more of those than most of the other models. There were a couple others that did quite a few. Lisa Karen, Cher Height, who was famous for the Height Report, was an artist model who did a lot of Sweat Mag covers. But I love these covers, even though they're like totally over the top, totally politically incorrect. One of the things people get wrong about them, in my opinion, is that anybody who sees a Nazi or a swastika somehow think it's glorifying Nazis. In fact, it's just the opposite. The Nazis were the bad guys. The main readership for these magazines were World War II veterans or later Korean War veterans, and they were also very popular at the PXs during the Vietnam War. And so there's nothing in these magazines that glorify Nazis whatsoever. And the idea of bondage and torture on cover art, as you all probably know, because you're Pulp Mag fans too, you got the Weird Menace pulp magazines. A lot of that stuff is even further over the top than some of the men's adventure magazine stuff. But it's also another link, I think, between the two genres, between pulps and men's adventure magazines.
Now, you may have recognized both in the illustrations by Al Rossi as well as in these Norm Eastman pieces that Ava had a frequent co-star. There's just another sample there. Men's adventure model Steve Holland and paperback model and actor Steve Holland. A very, very familiar face. Of course, he's the face of the Bantam Doc Savage reprints, as well as the Avenger, as well as
Countless.
Countless is the word. And Ava and Steve worked together quite well. Their relationship was strictly professional, but artists recognized that they had a certain chemistry. They worked well together, and they worked together very, very frequently.
And of course, I worked with Steve Holland, and the two of us worked a lot together. And there's no question, when I see his face, then I pretty well know it's me with him at a certain time, of course, not always. He had that incredible face that you can't miss. But I worked with Steve Holland for both Al Rossi and Norm Eastman a whole lot, and I'm so happy to have had that experience.
Another aspect of Ava's modeling, as well as Steve's modeling career, is they would frequently play multiple characters in the same scene. Which, once you're looking for that, you see it all the time. But it was a very economical way for the artist to capture the reference photography that they needed to create the work while only having 2 models for a session. And it definitely, it obviously required a certain chemistry, and it also required some real professionalism as actors. You have to imagine, for those of us who are not performers, the idea of going into basically an empty room in front of a photographer and the photographer saying, okay, you're going to be escaping, you need to be climbing up a wall, and Stevie, and in order to sell that, you've really got to be invested, you've really got to commit to it, which can be an awkward thing for people who don't act for a living or perform for a living. And that was another great thing about Ava and Steve, is just the way that they had that chemistry, that professionalism, they locked right in, and they were essentially performing for the still camera. Some more thoughts from Ava on that.
Rossi and Norm Eastman are my 2 favorite people, the ones I worked for more than anybody else. They're both fantastic artists, and they're very similar in the fact that they draw what they see. For example, Al Rossi used me for some things that it wasn't me, so he would change it a bit. For example, he painted me as a Korean lady at one point, but I could still see it was me, and luckily I had that picture to prove that it was me. So very similar, very good, very nice people, very considerate, never making passes, none of that stupid stuff. I always felt very comfortable modeling with both of them, and certainly with Steve, who was always a gentleman too. A very, very good experience in my life that I really enjoyed talking about, even because it was so nice.
And as you can see in this particular illustration, one of many, every character in there is depicted by either Ava or Steve. And they were just adjusted in the rendering.
Well, when it comes to acting for illustrations, it's very important that you know what the story is. And it takes acting, but it also takes modeling, because you can't keep moving around. You pretty much have to just stay not in the same position. You can move a bit while the illustrator is taking the pictures, but you are acting a part out. Whatever the illustrator said, no, we're going to do this and that, and you are this and that. And the same thing, I mostly worked with Steve, who is a very good actor too. And the reason we worked so well together is because we automatically knew what the illustrator wanted from us, and we went into those poses and those feelings, and that's how it worked, acting and modeling.
Something else that's kind of curious about Ava, as I had mentioned before, she really didn't track her appearances, often didn't know when or where she would be appearing. It was only later in life when her uncle, who was also living in New York, she discovered her uncle had been keeping scrapbooks. Her uncle had clearly been hitting the newsstands looking for his niece and kept these beautiful scrapbooks, which for Ava were a revelation because she had not seen many and many of these pieces. And I'm sure it was pretty impressive to her at that point to see just how much she'd done. When you're not keeping score, it can get out of control.
All the stuff I modeled for, especially the illustrations and such, was much later in life that I actually saw the magazines they appeared in, because it never occurred to me to look for any early on, because I would never know when they were coming out. But once I finally found them and started looking at the illustrations that were painted, for example, Norm Eastman always got me exactly right. I always recognized myself in his paintings, except that occasionally I wasn't sure, because it could have been me, or I wasn't sure if it really was, but mostly I knew. And the same thing with Al Rossi. He also did illustrations incredibly well. He took a lot of pictures, of course, and he painted from the pictures. But I could always tell that this was me. Not always, but mostly, let's say, that this was me. And it was sort of fun to see, really fun to see later in life.
And now, as the Men's Adventure magazine came to a close, Ava moved on to different pastures as well.
So after I left New York, for the final time, I was back and forth a couple of times, but after I left for the final time, I did some very nice parts in television shows, and which I enjoyed very much. And it's hard to talk about all those years because so much happened. I did some stage work, which I really loved. What else did I do? Oh, yes, I made a movie in Australia, working with Bobby Rydell for one person, he was a very good singer. He still is. I think he's still performing. And what else? I came back to Los Angeles. I joined an acting group where I met my present husband, Warren Munson, who is also an actor and a very good one. I am still doing commercials whenever I get a job. It's just great. I have at the moment a commercial called Vistaprint running. It's called Vistaprint Fish because it has to do with a bunch of fish coming on board and slapping people in the face. And it's rather funny, actually. So I'm still working with commercials whenever I can get one. I love it and it's fun.
And Ava's wishes are command.
This will work.
There she is.
Vistaprint, your partner in an ever-changing world.
And these days, just to keep going, I'm involved in an improvisational group, which I truly love. It's a lot of fun because you don't have to remember lines for one thing, and you make it up as you go. That sure helps a lot when you can't remember your name. So I'm having a good time. Anyway, I'm still alive. I'm having fun. I love what I did. I love what I'm doing, and that's about it.
Hello, PulpFest people. I am so very sorry that I can't be with you at this time. I so wanted to. When Mike Chumko last year asked me to come as a special guest to PulpFest and talk about my book, Men's Adventure Supermodel, which had just come out, I was thrilled to death. This was so beautifully put together by Bob Dice and Wyatt Doyle, and I love the book, so I hope you like it too. Anyway, I wanted just to mention a couple of things from my life in the 50s and 60s, which seems to have been coming back. Suddenly people are more interested in those magazines now than a long time in between. So my name has popped up on eBay, on magazine covers, and also on photos, and they sell for a ton of money. So much so that I can't even afford to buy my own magazines, which I have a few of finally. I never did collect them in the beginning because I never knew where they were going to show up. So I loved working with the illustrators in the 50s and 60s. For example, Al Rossi, who did mostly inside stories that people wrote and he illustrated. I worked for him a lot, usually with Steve Holland, who was a brilliant artist and performer. We worked so well together, and I loved working with him. And then, of course, early 60s, Norm Eastman shows up and asked me to pose for him. Now, he did mostly the outside covers of these men's magazines, which were either horrible torture things by the Nazis, and I was a victim with strangling and who knows what. Or I was a hero with a gun shooting my way out of some confinement. And usually Steve was with me on all those too. He was either my savior or he was one of the torturers. But you should know that there was no real torture going on because there were no torture instruments in the studio. All I had to do was pose, and Norm would take pictures, lots of pictures, as Al did also. And then they would put in all the rest of it in painting, and they were both brilliant. So anyway, mostly that's what I did, and that's what's so important right now because there's so many magazines out again. So anyway, what else can I say? Mostly my story is in my book, in case you want to buy one and look at it. And also Bob and Wyatt had some pictures that I signed ahead of time, in case you want some of those. So all I can say is I hope you're having a good time. And please, please take care of yourself. Get vaccinated so we can get rid of this horrible plague, which is really ruining everybody's lives. I wish I could be with you. I love you all. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I send you lots of love and hugs, and thank you so much.
She's prepared that video, and then she said, "Oh, I completely forgot something."
And by the way, my name is Eva von Felix Munson, also known as Eva Lynd. I should have mentioned that.
Outstanding job, Wade.
Thanks very much. I don't know if we have time for questions. Are we out of time?
Time to take couples.
Any questions? Yes.
I was just looking her up, and I saw that word sweat bag. I didn't know what it meant. But this guy wrote a really interesting thing. He said, "I regret that James was at Bama for
Bama?
For Doc Savage never put a girl on the cover." And then he also said that she would have been the ideal Pat Savage.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy. Any other questions? Yes.
Was she able to make a living doing this? I mean, is she well off? Or does she have other income?
You know, that's a good question. I mean, she worked for years and years. That's a very good. I don't really have an answer for that question, actually. But yeah, I mean, put it this way. Once she started modeling and acting, that was the only work. That's the work she did for the rest of her life. Starting off, she had mentioned she worked at Traff's as a waitress in the department store and had some jobs like that, more conventional work. But yeah, for the rest, I mean, that's what she's been doing since the 50s.
Off and on, she had a few things. She worked at a radio station for a while, as I recall. And
actually, she worked for Wolfman Jack.
Yes, that's right.
Last question.
Yes.
The cover, what's the story of that photo? Where that
The cover of the book where she's firing it. That is a cover from
That's the cover from this postcard.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what magazine that's from.
That one is. Where's the credit for that? I forget which issue it is.
Yeah, it was a magazine cover for sure. It's one of her favorite. It was from New Man, December '68, and it's a Norm Eastman painting.
A hard one to find.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. I mean, it might be my favorite Ava cover. I think she just looks so spectacular. Also, we like this image because it sort of puts to the idea that the men's adventure magazines were only about tormenting women or women as victims. It's the great thing about Ava is she was a real kick-ass heroine as well, and the covers, as you can see, are just spectacular, where she's depicted from a stronger kind of character.
You think she changed her name? Because I know Hogan's Heroes had a different name and then another one.
She very briefly, she said, when she did the Hogan's Heroes, she did go back to her original name of von Felix, but then she went back to Ava Lynd. And I think on the Cagney and Lacey, which was, I think, her last series television appearance, from the first episodes of Cagney and Lacey when Meg Foster was on the show. So you don't really see those pop up as much because they changed the actress out. But I think that was her last one. She was back to Ava Lynd by then. Thank you.
You've been listening to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the PulpNet. your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Please visit us online at thepulp.net. Also, look for the PulpNet on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps. The Pulp Event Podcast is copyright 2021.